Uh, well, welcome to a new normal and higher education online learning. We'll get through this together. Our presenters are Dr. David Hart from Capella University and Dr. Rebecca Armstrong from from Grand Canyon University. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to y'all.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Rebecca Armstrong, and I'm Dr. David Hart. Today, what we want to talk about is, some of the effects that COVID, among other factors, has had on virtual learning. We realize that, educators and scholars and authors have been talking about this for quite some time, certainly since the onset of COVID. But we also think that there are a few important factors that have been perhaps overlooked or maybe deserve a little bit more in the way of attention. So at that, we're going to discuss some of these factors, the way things were, the way things are now, and maybe some changes that need to be made in the course room. We might also ask that, as we're presenting the information today, that you take a few notes, and then we'll come back later on in the presentation, and we'll share some experiences and maybe talk about how these observations on our part apply to your course rooms. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca so she can talk about how things certainly are very different today than they were.
Hi, good morning. Good morning from the West Coast. It's nice and early out here. Anyway, thank you for having us. One of the things that is a question for us is, why are our students, Dave and I teach quite a few different classes, and why are they still struggling after COVID? And one of the things, that stands out, we're kind of getting through COVID. We can manage it, at least at this time, but we're having a persistent problem in our classrooms. And so normally, if you have, nobody's been through a pandemic, I don't think, and in America. But one of the things that we have going on is a lot of extra stress and concern to just kind of cause people to go off the rails. And we have inflation, and we have crime. We have the Great Resignation, where a lot of faculty and other people in other professions are just jumping ship because they're burnt out or they want to change their careers. We have a supply chain shortage for many things. Just walk into your grocery store. I don't know if you've seen it, but at my grocery store, I have lots of items that I can't buy anymore. And then we have this war, although we are not directly involved, it does affect us through our supply chain. Ukraine is a giant provider of grains, agricultural products. And so sometimes, it's not going to be there in different areas.
So let's talk about pre-COVID before we get into the way things are now. It seems to us, Dr. Armstrong and I have been given so many reports from our students at various universities and around the country, around the world for that matter, that students' interactions with others are just very different now than they were. Before COVID, there was a time when students could react to lessons learned in the course room as opposed to being limited to online learning. They could interact with one another without concerns, to ask questions and receive answers in a group format. And that just is not quite as much the case anymore, as Rebecca will talk about in a little while. Ways of studying are very different. We used to go to, traditional brick and mortar schools and again, intervene and interact. And the way we do that now is very different. We are limited in many occasions to online platforms, which can be very isolating. And we'll talk more about that as well. There was easy access to labs and to instructors. And so now that's much more difficult as a result of not only the pandemic, but other factors we feel, but the course room has certainly changed. The emotional support is different. Again, we used to take things for granted, perhaps just assuming that there were certain factors in play that we didn't have to worry about. And so now emotional support, even though it may be there, it's just different possibly to access. And then there's stability. There was stability in living conditions, work, school, and social relations. And it just seems like things are so much different now than they used to be. And there's been this paradigm shift. when Rebecca and I created these slides, it was 2 years. Now we're going into our third year of a move to a new normal. And so let's explore what that looks like in a little bit more detail.
Destabilizers. One of the things I happened to find in online from Inside Higher Ed, they had an article on January 13th that indicated that there's an epidemic of student disconnection, with a staggering number of disengaged and unmotivated students who feel psychologically overwhelmed. They have the inability to focus, and they are not engaged. And I know I can say that in my classroom, they aren't. I teach primarily asynchronously. I mean, I have one class that kind of has a little bit of involvement through Zoom, but other than that, they're all asynchronous learners, and they have mountains of excuses why they can't turn their papers in or do the work. And it just compounds, and all of a sudden we're at the end of the course, and they've had, they're failing because they haven't turned in their material. So some of the other destabilizers are, like Dave just mentioned, living conditions. I mean, the housing prices are astronomical. There's a lot of people that they just can't afford it. I saw on the news the other day, saw a college graduate had 3 jobs and they were living in their car. It's sad. Financial instability, educational challenges, the job market. While there's jobs out there, it doesn't seem like on some of them that people want to work. But that's just kind of something that I've noticed. The health concerns, and then grief. They're going through a period of grief because even if they didn't lose a loved one during the COVID pandemic, there's still grief from change, this dramatic change. It wasn't like just gradual so that they could get used to it. So the effects are like stress, headaches, depression, anxiety, insomnia. The list goes on. It's overwhelming. And there's 2 choices. You can stay in this mode and as status quo, or you can learn to accept it and adapt to the change. And here's some interesting facts. 30% of students, they don't even show up to complete assignments. 91% of online graduates express less online interaction. 46% of students at one university requested an incomplete, and they didn't follow through and they failed the course. And dropout, student perception versus the school, faculty, etc.'s requirements or expectations of the student are vastly different. The students that we teach, or that I teach anyway, they think that online education is just really easy. They're going to fly through it and get their diploma. Half to 2/3 of higher ed faculty are leaving the profession. And even though that was kind of predicted because of the birth rates, and it was predicted, but not at this rate. It's coming faster than anticipated.
So let's talk about this notion of student disengagement. It's happening more and more as a result of again, COVID and the way things have to be addressed now in the course room, this new normal, as Rebecca and I have entitled our presentation. Student disengagement, as you've heard Rebecca mention a minute ago, involves missing class a lot more than before. Some of them are much more unmotivated than they used to be. They're not submitting assignments. They're very passive in the course room as opposed to being active and interactive with themselves and with instructors as they used to be. Distractions in the online venue create learning problems. For some reason, they're just much more unable to cope with distractions as they used to be. And again, I think it's because of the need for devices and whatnot, and being on their own and having to be more disciplined. They procrastinate more. And last but not least, there's certainly a many more coping skills that are simply not being used. The problem then, as Dr. Armstrong and I see, results in mental health concerns. Some of these behaviors and the thoughts that are being reported to us involve stress and anxiety that could easily meet the criteria for an adjustment disorder. There's a lot of fear that they're seeing in the courtroom. They're just not prepared for what they're being faced with or for decisions that they have to make in online learning. There's an experience of shared trauma, which includes burnout, lower executive functioning, and there are just feelings of being overwhelmed. So I've been a clinician I'm in my 24th year now. And so, I am seeing, I have been familiar certainly with the DSM-5 for quite some time, and I'm seeing behaviors from students that clearly meet the criteria for an anxiety disorder. Some online students report feelings of fear, isolation, indecisiveness, lack of motivation, and other symptoms that meet the criteria for that anxiety disorder. And according to the DSM-5, anxiety disorders include features of excessive fear, anxiety, and related behavioral disturbances, which Rebecca and I have both seen. And in terms of diagnosis of an adjustment disorder, the presence of emotional or behavioral symptoms in response to an identifiable stressor is the essential feature of an adjustment disorder. And some of those symptoms include marked distress that is out of proportion to the severity or intensity of the stressor, and significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. And so, we all recognize that there are symptoms, if you will, or behaviors or actions that are being displayed by our students. But now we believe that maybe to the point where they're certainly even diagnosable and more severe than we ever thought before.
Normalizing life, what does that mean? One of the things that I found, another article, that the University of Maryland at College Park they are now offering a 1-credit class to teach the basics of emotional regulation skills to help the students understand how to deal with stress and anxiety and depression. And they're kind of giving them some coping skills. Obviously, this is kind of a widespread situation, but I think that's kind of ingenious to have something where they can actually get a credit for it. So it kind of boils down to resiliency. The resiliency today with some of the students is not completely like it was, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so they can't deal with some of the things that perhaps some other people years ago would not find quite so distressing. But one of the things that they can do is to acknowledge that there is a difference, acknowledge that we are not in 2019 anymore. Acknowledge their feelings. It's okay to feel sad or distressed or whatever, but then how do we get out of that? Limit the news and social media. There's hardly anything on news that is good news. So, don't add to the problem. And time management. I find, in fact, I looked at my messages this morning from my students, and I had a message that says, I got my paper in 1 minute after midnight. And it's like, why are you waiting until midnight and getting it in late? And then reconnecting with people, trying to, just reconnect, because a lot of people during the pandemic, they just kind of weren't able to get together. Now we can kind of get together, and it's really nice when people can be face to face if possible. Or thank goodness for things like this, like Zoom, where they can just, talk to somebody and see their face. So we do have tools, which are great.
So what needs to be different? Again, you've heard Rebecca and I talk about this environment called the new normal, as we're calling it, but things are certainly different. And so we believe that self-care is just crucial. If you haven't already begun a self-care regimen, then we think that the results can only be good. If you have one, then let's talk about the need to maintain that self-care routine. Self-care just means giving yourself permission to pause, to take a break. And what does that mean? How do we do that? Some of the images you can see on this slide include maybe meditation or yoga, just some sort of relaxation technique where we can just be by ourselves and not have to worry about outside influences. Take part in healthy eating and sleeping habits. Spend time, some quality time, some quiet time with our furry four-legged friends. You know, a lot of times there's a lot of benefit that can come from that. And take part in extracurricular activities. You can see the gentleman on the right in doing some pottery. Anything that we can do to step away for just a little while and give ourselves permission to go on a mini vacation, if you will, just to regroup and recollect our thoughts. So what are some ways that we can reset? We can understand that there are triggers around us. Recognize those triggers, recognize the effects that they have, and be in a position where we control those so that they don't control us. Redirecting negative thoughts. You know, I'm sure we're all familiar with, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy and the need to recognize how thoughts, behaviors, and you know, actions influence one another. And so, you know, if we're having a lot of internal negative dialogue, redirect that and turn it around, make it more positive. Take part in physical, you know, exercise and take breaks. Go for walks. If you find reading a book to be relaxing, give yourself permission to do that. As I said a minute ago, meditate, take part in yoga. Gardening can be very relaxing. It certainly is for me. Stretch, breathe, possibly listen to music to calm down. You know, talk. You know, listen to your internal dialogue, talk to the people around you, socialize, like Rebecca mentioned a minute ago, and give yourself permission to take naps and to sleep for just a little while to get back to a place where you're taking care of yourself and in a better place to function as well as possible.
So what can the students do? They can take ownership in what they're doing and not be, you know, passing it off on some other excuse. They can limit their distractions, like I mentioned earlier, active engagement, and they should be asking these questions and answering them. What do you know? You know, when you come into your course, what do you want to know? And what did you learn from the course? If they say at the end, what did you learn? And they say nothing, then there's a real serious problem. There's a real disconnect.
So how can we help students cope? How can they cope? How can they move to a better place where they're not so lonely or isolated? You know, Dr. Armstrong and I have talked to students around the country in the various schools that say that as a result of COVID and now having to, you know, possibly go into a virtual course room, that they feel like they're on a desolate island in the middle of nowhere. You know, students are scared, they're unprepared, they're not so sure what to do. So how can we help them feel less isolated and more in control? Rely on their support networks, collaborate with peers, participate in group activities, either in person or via Zoom. Set schedules and be more self-disciplined to avoid those results of not turning in assignments or turning them in late or turning in work that just isn't representative of what they're able to do. Eliminate procrastination, you know, remind students of instructor accessibility. Rebecca and I are both ones in our course rooms to just make sure that our students know how to get a hold of us at times other than Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You know, we realize that, you know, we have lives too, but we're also realists. And sometimes, you know, their questions or concerns need to be answered, you know, after hours you know, through the week and maybe even on a weekend. You know, and then process a manner in which you're going to handle challenges and disputes. Prepare for that happening because it's liable to. In the end, we believe that we need to help our students realize that some of the emotions and the feelings that they're experiencing are natural, they're normal, they're going to happen. And so we feel like if we share that message in the beginning, we're empowering them. Like I said, you know, Rebecca and I have worked with students, you know, who are just experiencing and reacting to challenges in ways now that they used to not have to. And we think our colleagues, you know, all of you are probably experiencing that as well. And so we feel that, again, if we can naturalize those feelings that they're having and put them in a place where they can use the skills that they have to overcome those challenges, that they'll feel more empowered and they'll certainly be in a better place to cope with what the virtual course room has to offer today. So There's some references for you that we have relied on throughout the presentation. We certainly thank you for your time and attention. Again, just remember that we'll get through this together. This is a new normal, but we have the ability to cope with that. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to turn it over to you all to see if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, David and Rebecca, for helping us to think through about what our students have been going through and how they will be coping with our difference in life as we're moving into the future. And certainly we here on the other coast are also seeing so many of the same issues and concerns, things that students are going through, and in ways that they are trying to cope right now. But thanks for your skills and strategies to help them transition now into what is going to be, how life is going to be different in school.
We're certainly glad that the presentation was recorded. We hope that other students will certainly access it and view it and realize that there are ways to cope with this. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. And also others who will be accessing this video will be online instructors and instructional designers, leaders. So we appreciate your valuable insights today.
Thank you.
And it's nice. It's nice to hear someone give you the permission to do things like stretch and read and garden, because we often need to take time for ourselves to pause and get recentered, because things have changed, and we need to acknowledge that things are still not normal, and who knows if they ever will be. So yeah, thank you.
We're not going back to what we are familiar with. So things have changed dramatically. Yeah, we need to learn how to adjust and how to cope. So thank you.
That's right. And thank you all for getting up so early on the West Coast to join us here in the Eastern time zone this morning to share with us.
Well, Rebecca's West Coast, I'm Central Time, so I'm only an hour behind you, but yeah, she's 3 hours behind. Just
Okay. Very good. Very good.